Welcome back to the channel. I'm Traben, and in today's video, we'll be doing a review for Battle of the Linguist Mages by Scotto. So I honestly don't even know how to start this one up. Battle of the Linguist Mages is one of the most over-the-top, bombastic books I've read in a long time. It reminds me of The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, which was just another book that had this unbridled energy, completely liberating feeling of the author just going off the rails and continuing to do exactly what they wanted to do and just not stopping to consider how absurd these ideas are, how crazy they sound. And there is a joy in that. There is a lot of fun to be had in a story that is not afraid to just go nuts and do the insane things that the author wants to achieve. I think in describing Battle of the Linguist Mages, I would say that if it were a movie, it would be described as a popcorn flick. It is fun, it is frenetic. Ultimately, there's not a lot under the surface. And in many ways, Battle of the Linguist Mages is a victim of its own successes. Any meaningful social commentary that you could argue is found in this book is almost immediately subsumed under the bombast of the video game logic and the approach to escalating tension. While the stakes certainly rise in this story from a person who just needs a job to literally fighting the embodiment of death and rebirth of the universe, nothing that happens holds any weight because characters can just heal from grievous injury by using a healing spell. Character reactions are likewise very flippant. Characters make remarks about how, oh, we should hang out later as long as the world doesn't end. And it suffers from the same criticism that the Avengers films often get, in that everyone in here is super clever and just all the time making quips and making these funny remarks. And so when you get up to those insane levels at the end of the book, they don't feel they don't feel important. They don't feel like they have any weight because the characters are not taking it any more seriously than they've taken anything else, right? And so at no point does anything feel dire, does anything feel like a true threat, because no one is treating it as such. This was actually an issue I had with another book I read earlier this year, Last Exit by Max Gladstone, where all the characters just seemed super smart and were always talking about these existential ideas to the point where no one sounded like an individual. They were all just so clever and so creative that nothing defined them as individual characters. They just seemed like a collection of pretty insufferable individuals with no clear delineation. Maybe I'm just expecting too much from this book. Like, clearly it's not at all interested in subtlety, neither with its action scenes or with any of its social commentary. There are thinly veiled stabs at Scientology here with the Temple of Gorvad, which worships an alien and is a hit among the social elite. The vilification of politicians who, as soon as they learn about power morphemes, the main tool of the battle linguists, attempt to weaponize them and instill themselves as empresses or as gods. I'm not saying I'm a fan of either of those things. Like, Scientology is a terrible culty religion, and I am not a fan of politicians in general. But again, the social commentary here doesn't mean anything because it is not presented in any clever way. It's another thing, just like the action, that's kind of bashed over your head. There's also a real disconnect for me in the way that the magic system within this book is introduced and then the way that it is executed. And this is going to take a little bit more explanation, but go with me on this one. Years ago, there was this panel of prominent science fiction writers, including J. Wells, Jim Butcher, and Patrick Rothfuss. And one of the key ideas that that panel discussed was the major categories of fictional magic systems. And the two that they discussed were scientific magic and poetic magic. Now, this is not a distinction that I think is unique to that panel in particular, but it is something that was very formative to me in my uh, approach to understanding and critically evaluating fantasy novels. Scientific magic can be found in series such as the Dresden Files or Mistborn. These books are largely concerned with explaining the rules of a magic system, giving explicit rules and limitations to the ways in which magic can be implemented. Primary enjoyment from these series is seeing our protagonist use the tools at their disposal in clever ways to overcome adversity. Dresden from the Dresden Files is routinely fighting outside of his weight class, and he usually succeeds because of his clever use of the areas of magic that he has mastered. Poetic magic, in contrast, is a system in which the rules of magic and the way that it works are obscured from the reader in some fashion. Joy here is in the mysticism of magic, the unknown of how exactly it works, and kind of the wonder of seeing it do new and interesting things that you weren't aware were even possible. Series like The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars would be excellent examples. To be clear, poetic magic still does have rules and limits to how its system works, at least it should in theory. It's just that we, the reader, the observer, are not privy to what those are. There is a sense of wonder and excitement when something new pops up or some new element is introduced that you weren't aware was even possible. The problem arises when you try to blend one of these two structures into the other. This goes a long way in explaining why midi-chlorians from Star Wars were so controversial when they were first introduced, because it added a layer of the scientific magic over the poetic magic system. And this is not to say that you can't have elements of both. Kingkiller Chronicles by Rothfuss is an example that uses both, but they have very distinct systems for scientific magic versus poetic. Sympathy is a scientific magic system. It has clear rules and expectations and limits and things you can and can't do. And the characters are seen trying to do clever things with sympathy. On the other hand, naming magic is poetic magic. It comes from the unconscious mind, and even those who have trained for years in magic arts can't explain how it works or might not even have access to it at all. At no point does Rothfuss try to blend the two. They stay distinct entities throughout that series. Battle of the Linguist Mages introduces power morphemes as a scientific magic system. At the start, the number of known morphemes is clearly delineated at 108. The purpose of individual morphemes is described, and some of the ways to blend them together into larger strings is explored. The linguistic concepts behind morphemes and phonemes and syntax are presented in enough detail that even someone with no linguistic background can still follow and understand the terminology. The amount of detail and specificity that's given to this magic system at the beginning of the book, you would expect that something clever would be done with the magic system, but no. Characters are mostly using the battle linguistics to conjure up spells from the in-universe MMORPG Sparkle Dungeon in a way that is not explained, explored, or really builds off of anything that has come before. There were several times in this book where a new spell was introduced as something that was in Sparkle Dungeon, and now we can just use it in the real world. And it was not predicated upon all that build up of the magic system at the beginning. Characters grow in power and they grow in their influence, but at no point did I feel like the characters were exploiting a facet of the way the system worked in a clever way. Rule of cool serving to empower characters to do what they needed to do in the moment. I don't feel like our main character, Isabel, ever really comes across anything that is truly challenging. At no point does she suffer significant loss or has to be introspective about who she is as a person. And who she is as a person is in many ways kind of insufferable. So the main character has been the queen of Sparkle Dungeon, the in-universe massive multiplayer online RPG, and she has been the first one to beat every single game. She's untouchable on the leaderboards. She's very, very smug about this. And her main power, her main claim to fame, is her improv skills, which really just allows the writer uh, to allow Isabel to adapt on the fly to any ridiculous situation they come up with. And again, I'm not saying that this book is bad. I enjoyed a lot of what this book was doing. The Sparkle Dungeon game and the different ideas that come from it were funny and entertaining. The fight scenes were frenetic, and just the raw energy it had, brazen quality of the storytelling. It's clear that Moore was doing exactly what he wanted to, and for a debut novel, it is definitely full of crazy, interesting ideas. I didn't even touch on the fact in this review that the concept of punctuation are aliens that have invaded our world, or that the ideosphere, the collective consciousness of all of reality, is a literal place that characters can and do enter and exit at will toward the end of the book. It's so freeing. Um, it feels so liberated from trying to confine itself to any kind of convention within the fantasy genre or the sci-fi genre. And for that, it gets a lot of credit. But when you get to the end of the book and it feels like nothing was really earned, that the characters didn't take away anything really from this entire experience, that most of the action feels kind of hollow in a way, because again, the stakes rise, but the tension doesn't. It just can't quite get there. It can't quite get to 5 stars. So, on sheer audacity alone, for the creativity of its premise, its execution, its complete, you know, off the wall concepts, and its infinite infinite stores of energy, I'm giving Battle of the Linguist Mages 4 stars. I don't feel like the characters are strong. I don't feel like the messaging or themes or don't feel like there's anything here other than a fun story full of a lot of action and energy. And if that's what you're looking for, this is a great choice. I just wish at the end of the day we could have had all of that plus a little bit to take away after you close the book. So that's all for my review of Battle of the Linguist Mages. If you've read the book and want to add your thoughts in the comments below, please feel free. As always, like and subscribe. We can grow this corner of our BookTube community. I hope your reading journey is going well. I hope you are getting a kick out of the books that you are reading. And until the next one, take care.